And welcome back into the On the Pony Express podcast. I am Billy Embody. Now, happy to be joined by KSL Sports Zone, Mitch Harper. Mitch, appreciate you coming on the show. You've done it all for us this week. You've answered questions for our subscribers on our website. You've had Dean Rolski on, and now you get to return the favor, and we're bringing you on. So thanks for coming on with us.
Well, I appreciate it, Billy. I think this BYU SMU matchup is going to be fun. I loved when this home and home series was scheduled. The history between these two programs, the few meetings that they've had, there's a great history between BYU and SMU in many respects. So, and then to make it a Power Four stage now, it's pretty awesome. So I'm excited to be here.
And SMU is looking for that first win in program history over BYU. And so the series is great. I think these programs, have delivered some great games. SMU's trying to get on the right side of it. BYU opened its season with a convincing win over Southern Illinois. Let's go back to that game. SMU now has 2 under its belt, but BYU opened the season. What were some of the things you wanted to see from them? And then how did that, compare to what they actually put out on the field in that 41-13 win?
I wanted to see BYU perform at a high level offensively because last year in their opener against Sam Houston and to a lesser extent Southern Utah, the offense was not explosive. BYU had no games last season more than 400 yards. Last week, 527 yards. And the catalyst behind that was Jake Retzlaff. And, Retzlaff was in a starting quarterback battle with former Baylor transfer Gary Bohannon, who Rhett Lashley noted he's familiar with him. Arkansas native Bohannon is from Earl, Arkansas. And he's going to have a lot of family at the game this week. But those two made each other better. And, Bohannon's health with the shoulder, he was coming back. He performed at a high level. And so Retzlaff had to be at his best to win the job. And his explosive playmaking ability through the air last week was a pleasant surprise. He was, by some recruiting outlets, the number 1 JC quarterback prospect in the 2023 cycle. I kind of take that with a little bit of grain of salt now because JUCO's not as deep as it once was, say, 10, 15 years ago, but still, number 1 in his class in that area of football. And so there was, expectations for Jake to be something good at BYU. And he kind of gave you a glimpse as to why the coaches wanted him, put him on scholarship and made him a guy that they feel could be QB1. And he had a strong performance against the Salukis.
And most of the time when I look at BYU and some of the scores that maybe are a little out of hand, I would expect it to be a little flipped, over 300 yards rushing, maybe 100 something through the air. Is that, passing attack, is that a concerted effort this year, just kind of how the game played out? Or is it just kind of a change in direction for the program?
BYU's identity has always been passing the football. And, the best BYU teams ever have always been a ratio about 60-40, 60 pass, 40 run. Coming into this season, Aaron Roderick, the offensive coordinator for BYU, made it clear they wanted to be a violent ground attack. Years ago when they had recently Tyler Algier, who's now with the Falcons, Jamal Williams, who's now with the New Orleans Saints, Chris Brooks, all NFL guys under Kalani Sitake, they had good ground attacks. And last year was non-existent in the Big 12. It was probably the worst rushing attack in the Big 12. So that was an area of focus. But personnel-wise, BYU's strength is at wide receiver, and they feel pretty good about the quarterback position. Throw the football. And they got a good offensive line that in recent years, despite some of their struggles, have been okay in pass blocking too. So I think that passing the football should always be a strength and a calling card of BYU, but that run game is something that they will work in as well. And they want that to operate at a high level, but the passing attack should be its core identity for this team.
49 times on the ground. That is something that a lot of teams across college football will look at and say, all right, better buckle the chin straps up this week. What's your kind of impression of how BYU views SMU's defense, the challenges it presents, and what, if any, they've talked about the changes since when they played them 2 years ago in that bowl game?
Yeah, the talk of the front seven, revamped with all the transfer portal additions. BYU's been well aware of the talent that Rhett Lashley has put together on that defense. And even Aaron Roderick noted this week that this is a big step up compared to Southern Illinois. And Southern Illinois was, top 4 in the FCS ranks last year, but they lost a ton of key personnel. So this is really going to be the first real test for BYU's offense because, they haven't beat a Power 4 team and since October last year, against Texas Tech. And I know SMU's looking for a coveted Power 4 win as well. So this is a game where both teams are really maybe looking at a barometer here to really kind of shape what their seasons are going to be, this season. So I think BYU has a lot of respect for SMU's talent. But I think BYU does have in the trenches offensive line wise, they're more physical this year. Last year, they were a weak offensive line. Caleb Etienne, the left tackle, he had his best game as a BYU Cougar last week. He's a former Oklahoma State transfer. He was a standout last week. He was a standout in fall camp too. They switched him over from right tackle to left. He's going to be someone to keep an eye on. He's key to BYU's success this season.
Jacob Richardson and what he brings to that BYU defense, I think a Jim Thorpe Award semifinalist. How big of a piece is he just overall for this BYU team? And how does he change what Jay Hill and that defensive staff can do when you have a lockdown corner like that?
He's a standout player, and only one target to his side of the field last week and one interception. So he makes plays, and he's added a little bit of weight to his frame. He feels like he's a more physical defensive back this season, but he's been someone that Jacob Robinson, who can swing a game and get a pick six and get some. He can create points on the defensive side for BYU, and that's a nice luxury for this team. And he's someone that I feel could be one of the 4 best cornerbacks in the Big 12, and there's some good ones in the league this year. But I think Robinson's near the top. He's a really good player for BYU.
I look at that front line that BYU has on the defensive line, and you look at Tyler Batty, Isaiah Bagna, and those guys are key for the Cougars up front. What does this front present, and what are some of the trademarks of how they play? I was talking with the former SMU offensive lineman on our podcast this week, and he was talking about how, there's a lot of different things that BYU does to really change how offensive linemen have to prepare for him. So it was an interesting conversation. But what is the staples and trademarks of this defensive line group for the Cougars?
They're really strong there's a physical defensive line. Tyler Batty, you brought up him. He had 27 snaps last week. Southern Illinois only ran the ball to his side of the field once. His stats, they were non-existent because they didn't go to his side of the field. He was someone last year that drew a lot of double teams because really the rest of the defensive line didn't do much. He had 5.5 sacks a season ago. BYU as a team had only 11. There's been a big storyline coming into this year. Can BYU generate pressure? Last year, their havoc rate was about 14%. This week after week 1, 21%. There's a big uptick, but that was against an FCS team, and that was similar metrics last year after week 1. Blake Mangelson and John Nelson in the interior are key for BYU's success. John Nelson, they're underrated guys. They're former defensive ends, but they're really good athletes. And it's interesting. They came to BYU as almost developmental project athletes that were, about 240 pounds. They've added a ton of weight over the course of their careers at BYU, and they've kind of still maintained that rangy athleticism, even being at 280 for Mangelson, 290 for John Nelson. So those guys are strong, but there's some questions in the depth in the interior. If they have to dig into that second, third unit, we'll see how they perform. There's some real questions, but the DNs, they feel like they've got about 4 or 5 guys that they can rotate in and out. There's an interesting one in true freshman Ephraim Asiata, number 44. Keep an eye out for him. He's kind of one that they dial up some heat whenever he comes on the field. He's going to be one where they're bringing some pressure. So, BYU's got an improved defensive line with a lot of experience, but there's still this case of how do they perform, week after week against this level of competition, and that's going to be the challenge. It starts with this Friday night.
You mentioned the sacks and some of the pressure that BYU is trying to dial up in our Q&A on theponyexpress.com. What are the differences you're seeing in some of that havoc that they're trying to create? And do you think that this group is, a little bit more better equipped to improve upon that 11 sack mark from last year?
There's a greater understanding of the defense. Jay Hill's defensive scheme is complex. He throws a lot at these guys. And, in retrospect, last year, I think this team their head was spinning at times where they didn't have a full grasp of the scheme. And, so I think that's helping the cause too. And I also believe that they just got better personnel all around. They did focus a lot on continuity. BYU was, in the top 3 of fewest pickups in the transfer portal. Kind of the opposite of SMU, where they focus just solely on roster retention and player development. They've improved their NIL war chest, if you will, but still, it wasn't to get guys from other schools. It was just to maintain the roster. So they did a good job there. And, but they did get one guy from the portal that has been a key difference maker, and he was the leading tackler a week ago, Jack Kelly. And Rhett Lashley pointed out the speed at linebacker. It's because of him. He can do a lot of different things on BYU's defense. They could line him up at defensive end, that OE spot, outside edge, linebacker. He can drop back in coverage. He is a all-around playmaker for BYU on defense. And it's interesting because he came from just Weber State, the FCS ranks. You wouldn't think much of him, but Jay Hill obviously coached him up, recruited him, and they have a lot of belief in him. He's one of the strongest players in the program. He's a really good football player, and he missed opportunities last week. He could have had a better stat line than what he ended up with 5 tackles, and I think, half a tackle for loss. So Jack Kelly's one to keep an eye on, number 17.
Who are some of the X factors on this BYU team, both sides of the ball? Who do they need to, have a day, so to speak, if they're going to come into Dallas and win?
Chase Roberts at wide receiver. He's in his 4th year in the program, a redshirt junior, and he is taking a big step forward, I think, in his development. He had 7 catches, I think 107 yards a week ago, 8 targets. It was interesting this week. Kalani Sitake noted that they feel like they're utilizing him like they did Puka Nacua, who's an LA Rams star, and Puka was a special player when he was healthy for BYU in his 2 seasons when he transferred in from Washington. So that's kind of the high respect. BYU is interesting that you look across their team outside of Batty and to a lesser degree Robinson. There's not many guys that kind of conjure up the star label. It's a lot of maybe they could be that, but I do believe Roberts is that guy on the offense. I also think running back LJ Martin, he's one to keep an eye on. I know that the carries were pretty split between him and Hinkley Ropati, but as the season continues to progress and his shoulder continues to get healthier, I mean, he looked good last week. I fully expect that he's going to become that feature, if you will, bell cow back for BYU in the backfield. I think he could be someone that has a big production. He's from El Paso, West Texas. So I'm sure, just playing in the state of Texas, I think will mean a lot to him going to Dallas. And defensive side, we talked about Robinson, Jack Kelly, Batty. Another one I'd keep an eye on is Micah Harper. He plays a little bit of nickel, can also go to strong safety. He's a hard-hitting safety. He played his first game action last week since coming back from an ACL injury in 2023. He missed all of last year. Really good football player. He's one to watch as well on the back end of the defense.
All right. How do you see this game playing out? What are the keys for the Cougars? What are the keys, as far as trying to get out ahead of what SMU is going to try to do? And do you have a prediction?
I think, SMU is going to probably try to utilize their speed on the edges early against BYU. I think BYU's got to set the tone with the physicality and score early. There were the games last year with Jake Retzlaff on the road. BYU had some success against Oklahoma State where they built a little bit of a lead and they, had a cushion, but they're just still, they didn't have the ability to complete a game for a full 60 minutes. But I think for this team, they faced a lot of adversity, and I think there's a good mindset with this group. But I feel like setting the tone early will be critical for this group to get off to a fast start. So I think that's going to be a big key. I think BYU also has got to prevent turnovers. Jake Retzlaff put the ball, or the BYU offense at large, they didn't have any turnovers last week, but they put the ball on the turf twice. Jake Retzlaff has a tendency to get a little greedy sometimes. He's got to be smart with his decisions and not, try to get an extra few yards on that quarterback keeper. He's got to take care of that football and throw into the correct passing lanes as well, because a lot more opportunistic defense, I would assume, here with SMU. Even though the secondary for the Mustangs, I feel like BYU could maybe attack and have some advantage, and they got to do that in this game. I just feel like this is going to come down to the wire, and this is a toss-up football game. I really like SMU's roster a lot, in the talent. I think they got a little bit more depth and talent overall than BYU. I'd say SMU by a field goal, but it wouldn't surprise me if BYU did spring the upset here, just because some of the issues, and you know better than me, Billy, but I mean, the SMU offensive line, I think BYU's defensive front could, exploit that maybe if they do. But it's a prove it. You got to show me before I can say confidently they're gonna do it. I mean, when you're a team that was 11 sacks a season ago, I just can't bank on that right now. There's momentum, sure, but they got to prove it. So I would slightly give the edge still to SMU by a field goal, but I will say too that week 0 performance and kind of the lack of discipline from SMU surprised me, and I just thought that BYU's gonna be disciplined, and they only had 3 penalties last week. And they are a mature football team. I know it's a cliche with BYU with the missions and things like that, but this group is mature, and so I think BYU won't beat themselves, but I like SMU's overall talent more, and I'll say SMU by 3 right now.
That's the hard part about this game is, and this season for SMU. Each team is different. They have tons of new pieces. They also have some nice returning pieces, but they haven't beaten a Power 4 opponent in over a decade at home, and they've, I think, only beaten TCU really in the past on the road. So it's a show me game for both programs, right? And BYU is trying to get back to bowl eligibility and get their season, on the right direction early on here. So it's a big game for them. SMU's offensive line, you mentioned that the trenches for me are where this game is going to be won or lost for SMU. If they come out, push around BYU, set a tone, that will, carry them. I think if SMU could start fast in this one, I think it'd go a long way to getting it done for them. I've got SMU 31-20. I just really like SMU's defense, and I don't know if you see it as a low scoring or a high scoring affair, but I think their defensive line is going to be able to do some things. Southern Illinois got a couple sacks. I don't know if you could shed a little last minute light on those, but that's kind of my read on this one.
Yeah, I see it being SMU 24, BYU 21. I think BYU's got a history under Kalani where they spring upsets in the first month of the season. BYU in September, the last 4 years they've had at least 3-1 starts. I mean, they get off to strong starts under Kalani, and last year they won on the road at Arkansas as an 8-point underdog where not many people expected them to win that. They got down 14-0 and then won that one. So BYU is a good, they're always good for one big upset. And I think this would be a big upset for BYU and to help with their bowl eligibility cause. As far as the sacks go, there was one where the right tackle, Braden Keim, who's a really good player, kind of a freaky athlete, could be kind of a combine hero if he gets an invite next February or March. He just had a wrong decision. I mean, he just went inside, and then the edge rusher for Southern Illinois nothing went in front of him. He just had a clean look at Jake Retzlaff and got the sack. It was one that he clearly knew he made a mistake, but he's going to be a pretty good player for BYU. I don't think there's anything cause for concern there, but the talent is a big step up this week, and I'm very curious to see how BYU's O-line performs against SMU's defensive front, because that old offensive line for BYU, they brought in a new offensive line coach, TJ Woods. He's a run game coordinator. He's almost as critical as the offensive coordinator with the identity and the vision of this offense. He's coaching not only the O-line, but he works with the tight ends, the running backs, because he's the run game coordinator. So his voice is there with all these players on the offensive side. So that's an important piece too, the trenches for BYU.
It's going to be really interesting. Well, Friday night action in the state of Texas, not high school. We're going college this time. ESPN2, 6 p.m. Central Time. SMU BYU Mustangs looking for their first win over BYU in program history. Mitch Harper from KSL Sports, thanks so much for stopping by. We'll be seeing you because this is a series as well.
That's right. Yeah, I'll be there Friday night in the press box, so I look forward to seeing that. But then 2027 in Provo, it'll be great to have all the SMU fans come back. First time since the weird WAC 16-team WAC days, but it's going to be a good time. I can't wait.
We're looking forward to it, and we're looking forward to bringing you all of our game coverage at ontheponyexpress.com. So thanks for listening to this edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. We'll catch you guys post-game as the Mustangs look to topple the Cougars. Thanks for listening. Catch you guys after the game.